It was the kind of courtroom people forget exists. No flags, no press, no defense table. Just cold tiles, a flickering light overhead, and a boy in a gray hoodie standing alone, arms scraped, lips swollen, eyes still. Name. The judge snapped, not bothering to look up from the folder. The bailiff mumbled it. The boy didn't speak. He didn't have to. His presence was enough. His silence was pointed. Charge, resisting arrest. Translation. He flinched when a school cop shoved him down a stairwell. No lawyer. No guardian. Just procedure. The judge looked at the boy like a janitor looking at gum on a shoe. You kids think you can do whatever you want, he said. Maybe a few weeks in juvie will reset your attitude. Gavel slammed. Case closed. Next. The boy didn't cry. Didn't move. Just kept staring at the judge with something heavier than anger. 17 minutes later, the courtroom phone rang. A secretary whispered, pale-faced, into the judge's ear, "Sir, you need to stay here. The inspector general is in the building. You just sentenced his son." If you felt that shift, hit save, drop a comment, and share this with someone who still believes silence means weakness. Most kids hit snooze. He didn't own an alarm. He woke up every morning at 5:42 a.m. without fail, just his body knowing. No one else in the apartment was up, no footsteps, no lights, no voice calling his name. He padded across the floor in socks that didn't match, flicked on the stove, and boiled water in a dented kettle. Oatmeal, dry toast, and a splash of condensed milk he kept tucked behind the mustard jar, so no one else would find it. His hoodie smelled like detergent and a little like metal. He cleaned it himself. Same one every day. Gray zip-up, one cuff torn where a chain-link fence caught him 2 years ago. He didn't sew it. He didn't need to. The tear reminded him of something he hadn't told anyone. Something he didn't plan to. He packed his bag carefully, not like a kid, but like a soldier. Spiral notebook. 2 pens. His journal, always wrapped in a plastic grocery bag, even though it hadn't rained in weeks. Then the ID card, bent, creased, but still scannable. Still his. When he walked out the door, the light was still blue, and the city still slow. He took the long way to school, past the closed barber shop and the alley that always smelled like smoke. Past the wall with the peeling mural of the girl holding the earth. Past the house where the curtains were always closed. He walked like someone who didn't want to be noticed, but wouldn't flinch if you did. At school, he didn't talk unless asked, didn't eat in the cafeteria, didn't raise his hand, but he listened to everything. He watched how Principal Latimer clenched his jaw when a kid said the word lawyer. He noticed how Ms. Hernandez stopped asking him to stay after class once she realized he wasn't one of the fixable ones. He kept count of how many times Coach Dillard called someone boy in a way that didn't sound like son, and how many of those boys looked like him. They thought he didn't care. He just didn't show it. There was a moment. A Thursday. Cold. He was walking to class when a white 7th grader called him porch monkey. Loud. Public. Laughs followed. He didn't swing. Didn't yell. He turned, walked straight up to the kid, and whispered one thing. So soft, even the kid's friend didn't hear. The boy turned pale. Backed up. Didn't say another word all year. No one knew what was said. Not even staff. But the next day, that same kid brought a full lunch tray and placed it at the quiet end of the table where the black student sat. The others took it. The boy didn't. His hands were always busy. Drawing. Folding paper. Writing things no one would read. He kept a list in the back of his notebook. 3 teachers who used his name with respect. 2 cops who followed him home once. 1 neighbor who said, "You don't smile much, huh?" And he answered, "I smile when I'm safe." He wasn't dramatic. He was disciplined, like someone trained for something. When he walked, he scanned corners. When he sat, his back was to the wall. When he slept, he placed his shoes facing the door. When he cried, no one knew. The journal. Every day, he wrote something. Not diary stuff. Not dear journal nonsense. Just sentences. The system is only ever sorry after. They talk loud because they're afraid I'll speak. I don't know my father's voice, but I remember his walk. My body will grow, but my file already has. The only time I see power in this city is when it's abused. Once he wrote, "The judge won't remember my face, but he will remember what happens after he sees it." He didn't know when he'd use that line, but he felt like the day was coming. The world didn't see the discipline. It saw a troubled kid, a hoodie in a hallway, a kid who didn't make eye contact with teachers, a name they forgot how to pronounce, a silence they mistook for attitude. He wasn't the loudest, he wasn't the biggest, but something in him made grown men nervous. Even the school cop, Officer Randall, said, "There's something about that boy. You look at him and you feel like you're the one being watched." And he was watching, listening, waiting. What they didn't know, his mother used to be a prosecutor, gave it up when the system buried one of her cases, and fired her for digging. His father? No one in the neighborhood had seen him. People whispered stories. CIA, FBI, dead, missing. Truth was, he wasn't missing. He was watching too. That boy had been raised like a case file. Every detail mattered, every interaction logged. He didn't know everything about the law, but he knew the sound of someone bluffing with power they didn't deserve. The day before the arrest, he looked at his reflection and whispered, "Tomorrow I get smaller, so they show who they really are." And when they pushed him in the stairwell and pinned him down, he didn't scream. He didn't beg. He watched. The officer said, "Stop resisting." He was flat on his back, arms up, lip bleeding. He whispered, "I'm not the one resisting." They cuffed him, hauled him out. No guardian, no call. They thought they could rush him through the system, slam a label on him. Another problem checked off before lunch. They thought he'd break, plead, cry. He just sat, still, waiting for them to finish digging their own grave. If this feels like a storm is building, it is, and when it breaks, it won't be loud. It'll be surgical. Keep watching. Share this if you know what it's like to be underestimated because you stayed quiet. They didn't read him his rights, didn't call his guardian, didn't even let him use the bathroom. They pulled him into the precinct through a back door, like contraband. A 12-year-old boy, blood on his hoodie, handcuffed to a plastic chair too big for his frame. The walls were gray. The clock didn't tick, it buzzed. Nobody offered him water. Nobody said his name right. The officer who brought him in was still sweating from the scuffle, pacing, mumbling something about attitude problems and setting an example before spring break. The sergeant on duty didn't look up from a screen. "Juvenile?" "Yeah." "Call in social. Move him through intake." The intake clerk barely looked at him. She tapped on a keyboard like she was ordering lunch, not cataloging a child. Date of birth. He didn't answer. She didn't care. She typed estimate 12. In that building, silence wasn't a right. It was an excuse to ignore you faster. They put him in a side room. Not a cell, just a box with no door handle on his side. A desk, a camera, a metal chair that rocked when you leaned back too far. He sat forward, calm, studying. Not the walls, the system. He watched how they held the folders. Who made eye contact and who didn't. Who buzzed through which door. Who got coffee and who got barked at. He knew exactly when shift change happened, because the tone of the hallway changed. Footsteps lighter, jokes louder. Everyone pretending the machine wasn't chewing someone up in the next room. They brought in a clipboard, shoved it toward him. "Sign this." He read every line. The officer rolled his eyes. "Come on, you can read, right?" He looked up slow, measured, then signed left-handed on purpose. He wasn't left-handed, but that signature would be useful later. Across the building, a public defender was supposed to be on call. No one called. No one planned to. The boy heard one officer say, "It's easier when they're young. They don't know they can say no." He wrote that down on the back of the intake form. They like them young. Easier to bend. Easier to bury. By hour 3, a woman from youth services came in. Tight bun. Rushed. Pretended to be nice. "We're just making sure you're safe." He said nothing. "We can't help you if you don't talk." He looked up, blinked once. "You're not here to help me," he said. "You're here to help them feel better about what they've already decided." The woman froze, swallowed, left. Back in the hallway, a young officer leaned against the wall, scrolling on his phone. He watched the boy through the glass, eyebrows furrowed. "He's not like the others," he muttered. "Feels like he's watching us." Another officer laughed. "Don't romanticize it. He's just another case number." But the younger one didn't laugh. He stared. There was something in that kid's stillness that made noise. They filed the paperwork wrong. On purpose. Filed him under repeat offender, even though he had no record. Flagged him for hostile demeanor. Coded his race as ambiguous. Checked guardian unknown. Typed no immediate threat, then added potentially volatile if provoked. Language that builds a wall before you even enter the courtroom. Language that doesn't say child. It says containment. In the system, paperwork is a weapon. A name becomes a number. A delay becomes a punishment. A silence becomes a confession. And they thought they were getting away with it. What they didn't know was that every line they falsified, every signature they rushed, every timestamp they forged was being recorded. Not by a camera, by the boy. Line by line, name by name, face by face. Filed, logged, memorized. He didn't need evidence. He was the evidence. He wasn't scared. He was waiting. At 5:02 p.m., they transferred him to holding for overnight juvenile detainment. Standard protocol, they said. No call was made to any parent. No hearing scheduled. No judge alerted. They assumed no one would come looking. They assumed wrong. Because the man they didn't call, the man whose number was in the system under emergency contact, wasn't a relative. He was the Inspector General for Judicial Oversight, appointed 6 months ago to investigate unethical juvenile court proceedings in that very district. He wasn't at home. He was 2 blocks away, watching, listening, and waiting for them to finish stacking their lies. If you've ever watched the machine move like it owns the truth, share this. Tag someone who knows the real damage happens before the courtroom ever starts. They could have stopped at neglect, could have let the kid sit overnight, file the charges, and call it bureaucracy. Would have been cruel, but forgettable, just another number lost in the gears. But systems that feed on silence always want more. That night, they crossed the line. It started with the search. Not standard, not procedural. They said they had reason to believe he was carrying contraband. He was 12. They took him to a back room with a thin divider and no working camera. 2 officers. No witness. No youth advocate. "Take off the hoodie," one of them said. He did. "Shirt too." He paused, looked at them, didn't move. "Take it off." The second officer stepped forward, voice low and cold. "You can make this easy, or we can call it non-compliant and go hands-on." They didn't realize how calm he was, how still, how completely unshaken. He took off the shirt. They stared at the scar on his shoulder, jagged, surgical, not recent, a wound that had nothing to do with this city. They asked nothing, wrote nothing, but something changed in their faces, like they saw the edge of something they didn't want to understand. One reached for the journal in his bag. "Hey!" He stepped forward. Fast, not violent, just sharp. The officer froze. "Sit down." He didn't. "You don't touch that," the boy said, voice even, eyes locked. "That's evidence." "No, that's mine." "Not anymore." The boy's voice dropped to a whisper. Steady, measured. "You're going to want to unfile that report." The officer blinked. "What?" But the boy had already stepped back, sat down, come again, as if nothing had happened, except something had. A moment, a slip, a fracture in the illusion that this was just another intake. Because in that room, surrounded by grown men with badges and weapons, it wasn't the boy who broke character. It was them. And somewhere close, a phone vibrated in a pocket, a message sent, received. The inspector, still waiting, read 3 words on a screen. They touched the journal. He stood. Inside the precinct, the lights flickered once, brief. The power didn't go out, but something else did. That false sense of control, the casual cruelty, the easy confidence that this child could be erased before morning. Because the line had been crossed. Not in volume, not in spectacle, in silence, in the choice to violate something personal, private, human. When the inspector stepped into the building 13 minutes later, no one stopped him. He didn't flash a badge, didn't raise his voice. He walked past the front desk, past the fingerprint scanner, past the break room where one officer was still bragging about how the little punk flinched. He didn't flinch. He remembered. And now, so would they. If you've ever had something taken from you, not because it was illegal, but because someone wanted to remind you they could share this, the story's about to flip. The precinct had seen senators drop by for photo ops, had hosted prosecutors during campaign years, but it had never seen someone walk in and make silence feel like a verdict. He didn't wear a badge on his chest. He didn't have to. A gray suit tailored, navy tie, pressed shirt, an ID clipped to his belt, black, not blue, and a name that had been whispered in meetings but never said out loud with certainty: Thomas Jericho, Federal Inspector General for Judicial Oversight. The man who doesn't make public statements. The man who signs removals in ink that doesn't smear. He didn't ask where his son was. He already knew. He walked straight past the captain's office. The lieutenant came out stammering, "Sir, if we'd known." Jericho didn't blink. He reached the intake wing. One long hallway. 4 chairs. A metal table. And behind the two-way glass, his son. Still seated. Still quiet. Shirt back on. Hands folded. Eyes steady. Their eyes met for exactly 2 seconds. No nod. No smile. Just recognition. Jericho turned to the officer on duty. Room B. Who processed him? The officer opened his mouth, closed it, looked down. Inside the glass-walled room, a clerk tried to play casual. "Can I see your credentials?" Jericho reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a single-page memo. Stamped, signed, marked active investigation, sealed authority. "I'm not here to ask for cooperation," he said. "I'm here to document resistance." The journal sat on the table, still sealed in a bag, tagged as evidence. Jericho picked it up, carefully, hands gloved. He didn't open it. He turned to the officers in the room, 2 from intake, 1 from patrol. "Who opened this?" No answer. "Who authorized the juvenile strip search?" Silence. "One more time. Who touched my son without legal guardian present and failed to notify the court of his intake?" One tried to speak. Stumbled. He wouldn't give a number. Jericho cut in. Calm. Precise. "He doesn't have to. You do." They weren't looking at a father. They were looking at a federal official with full clearance, quiet fury, and the authority to suspend careers before lunch break. One of them said, "Sir, if we'd known..." You don't get to treat people like animals and apologize when they turn out to have connections. You follow protocol with everyone. He stepped toward the file cabinet. "Bring me the intake file. Now." The original timestamp, not the altered one. The room froze. "You altered it, didn't you?" A young officer in the back swallowed hard. "Yes, sir." "For whose convenience?" "Sergeant Vale, sir. He said the judge didn't like gaps in the timeline. That was it. One name. One thread." Jericho didn't raise his voice. He opened his folder. Began to write. Slowly. Intentionally. "Sergeant Vale. False documentation. Procedural breach. Juvenile rights violation. Potential witness coercion." Then he turned to the door. Looked back through the glass at his son. "He'll walk out of here in 10 minutes, he said. Then, to no one in particular. "Get ready. I'm walking into court next." Outside the precinct, the wind had picked up. Inside, the walls weren't shaking, but everyone inside them was. You felt that shift, didn't you? This is what justice looks like when it stops asking and starts showing up. Repost this if you've ever been counted out before the truth got to the room. Courtroom for be smelled like old coffee and cheap panic. Judge Harmon liked routine. He liked control. And most of all, he liked silence, the kind where no one questioned his rulings, no one double-checked his math, and no one ever asked what happened to the files that went missing between Friday and Monday. He didn't expect a hearing that morning. Certainly not this hearing. Certainly not this man. The doors opened. No, bailiff announced him. No one needed to. Thomas Jericho stepped inside like he already owned the transcript. The court clerk stood. The stenographer blinked. The judge looked up and instantly felt that drop in his gut, the one you feel when you realize the game you've been winning just got audited by the man who built the scoreboard. "Mr. Jericho," Harmon said, lips dry, "I wasn't informed you were. I didn't need an appointment. This isn't a courtesy visit." Jericho laid down the file folder. Thick, labeled, tabbed. He pulled out one sheet, a copy of the juvenile docket from the day before. Case 18 to 212. Minor male. Age 12. Booked without guardian notification. Held without legal counsel. Strip searched without warrant. Evidence confiscated without probable cause. Intake timestamp altered. Signature forged. Harmon sat back. "You understand that we—" "No," Jericho said. "You understand." The courtroom was quiet, but not neutral. It was the quiet of a loaded gun placed gently on a table. Jericho didn't yell. He didn't posture. He just read. This court processed an illegal juvenile hearing in under 12 minutes. No defense present. No parental contact. No psychological evaluation. A guilty plea was entered by the judge, and the minor in question was scheduled for detention pending review. He flipped to the next page. "This minor's name is Elias Jericho. My son." He let the sentence hang. It didn't echo. It landed. Harmon tried to recover. "I was following." "Procedure?" Jericho asked. "Show me which section of the juvenile code allows you to process a child without verifying guardian status." "Go ahead." "I'll wait." Harmon flipped, stalled, pretended to scan. Pages moved. Nothing was found. Jericho continued. "Let me make this clear. I'm not here for clarification. I'm not here for sympathy. I'm here to place you and this court under federal review." He dropped another document. "This is an official notice of audit. Starting today, your rulings over the last 18 months will be re-examined, with special attention to race-based discrepancies, procedural shortcuts, and unconstitutional sentencing patterns." He stepped forward. "Do you recall the name Jamal Deeks?" The judge paused. "Yes." "A 13-year-old. Similar charge. 2-week detention. No legal counsel. He's now in state custody." Another sheet hit the table. "That case is being reopened, and so are 64 others." The judge sat frozen. Jericho took a breath. Slow, controlled, then delivered the line that would echo beyond the walls of that courtroom. "Justice doesn't start when the system decides to behave. It starts when someone shows up who remembers what it's supposed to look like." Then the final move. Jericho turned to the court reporter. "This is now a matter of public record. Mark it." Then he turned to the clerk. "Tell the bailiff, clear the docket. Judge Harmon is relieved of duty until further notice." And just like that, the man who thought he was the final word in a child's future became a footnote in his own investigation. Not fired, not dragged, just silenced by process, by power, and by the man who knew exactly which doors to walk through. If you've ever wanted to see justice without the performance, share this. Quiet power is still power. It just doesn't clap for itself. The courthouse coffee machine broke that morning. It was a small thing, but everyone felt it. Clerks were quieter. Bailiffs moved slower. Something about the air felt exposed, because when someone like Jericho walks through your building with a folder that thick, it doesn't just target the guilty. It shakes the comfortable. And people who've stayed quiet, sometimes for years, start asking themselves the hardest question. If this is finally being looked at, what else can I say now? The first to speak wasn't a whistleblower. It was a janitor. Old. Been there since before most of the judges had their first robe fitting. He walked by Jericho in the lobby the next day. Didn't say much. Just nodded. Slipped him a post-it note. "Check intake room C. Camera's been unplugged since October. Everyone knows." Then came the clerk. Mid-level, exhausted, always polite. She pulled Jericho aside after meeting and whispered, "Judge Harmon fast-tracked over 30 underage cases last fall. Most of them were Black or Latino. No counsel. No record of guardian contact. He said they were low-priority dockets." She opened a drawer. handed him a manila folder with a red paperclip. "I've been keeping copies, just in case." An intern followed. 19. Nervous. He waited outside Jericho's car. "I shouldn't be talking to you," he said, "but I saw the intake logs for your son. They edited the timestamp twice. First to match the judge's schedule, then to hide the strip search. The file metadata still shows it." He handed over a USB. "I didn't come here to break rules. But I didn't come here to watch them break kids, either." One by one the stories came. None of them started with bravery. They started with relief that finally someone had cracked the glass. That finally someone who couldn't be silenced had walked in. A legal assistant brought emails. A former public defender sent copies of case summaries that had been misfiled. A retired judge, anonymous, wrote a letter. Harmon wasn't the only one. He was just the loudest. The others smiled more, used cleaner words. But they all learned the same playbook: delay, confuse, isolate, and bury. Especially the boys who don't know their rights yet. Within a week, Jericho had 47 statements, 11 with evidence, 5 that named specific judges, 3 that opened old cases once considered closed and clean. He didn't go to the press. He went to the Office of Civil Rights, filed every document, hand-delivered, logged, signed. Meanwhile, inside the courthouse, things started shifting. The hallway bulletin board, once covered with court calendars, now had sticky notes with initials and quiet instructions. "Check September 3rd docket. Where's the intake for EM? Who's assigning these without counsel? Ask where the cameras went." No one had to say the word "cover up," but it hung in the air like smoke. The system wasn't imploding. It was cracking slowly, precisely, under the pressure of truth being documented, not shouted. And Elias? He watched it all, not from the center, but from the side. He still didn't speak much. But when Jericho handed him a sealed envelope and said, "They're reopening the Deeks case because of you," he nodded once. Didn't smile. Just wrote one new line in his journal that night. They built silence into the walls. But someone finally remembered how to knock. If you've ever thought the system couldn't be moved, share this. It only takes one person to open the door. But it takes a second to hold it. There was no podium, no press conference, no quote for headlines. When justice finally moved, it didn't announce itself. It just walked into the records room with a badge that didn't need a spotlight and a stack of files that would end 6 careers before Friday. Thomas Jericho didn't come to punish. He came to clean house. He spent 13 hours across 3 days reviewing juvenile cases, not from behind a desk, but sitting shoulder to shoulder with clerks who used to flinch when a judge raised his voice. He rewrote protocols, not abstract ones, real ones, mandatory legal representation within the first hour of juvenile detainment, guardian notification logged, recorded, and confirmed with double signature, a digital audit trail for every case touchpoint, with real-time oversight from the Office of Civil Rights. He didn't ask for approval. He'd already been given authority. All he needed was space. And now, nobody could stop him. There was one case he held on to, the one that hit the hardest. Jamal Deeks, 13, pushed into the system over a vape pen that wasn't his, sent to detention for noncompliance. 2 months in, missed his brother's funeral, came out quiet, different. Jericho signed the motion himself. Case vacated, record sealed, public apology mandated, civil damages pending. No cameras, just a signature, just a life being slowly, properly restored. And for Elias, there was no parade, no public acknowledgement, no brave young man article. Jericho gave him something better. His name cleared, his record clean, his journal returned. Elias didn't smile when he got it back. He didn't say thank you. He just opened it, wrote a single sentence, closed it again. Justice isn't mine to give. But today, I stopped waiting for someone else to get it right. Before Jericho left the courthouse that day, he asked to speak to the entire juvenile processing staff. He stood in the middle of the intake hallway. Everyone gathered, some nervous, some angry, some ashamed. He didn't scold. He didn't preach. He said this: "You don't have to be the one breaking kids to be part of the machine that does. If you stayed silent while it happened, you weren't neutral. You were on the side that made it easier." He paused, then added, "But if you're here now, paying attention, you have a chance to stop choosing silence. That's what this is. Not a purge, a reckoning." He turned, walked away. No applause, no words, just the sound of a man who didn't need the system to like him, only to fear ever going back to the way things were. Share this if you believe justice isn't about headlines. It's about someone making sure silence never feels safe again. It started with a whisper. In a staff meeting at Juvenile Court West, someone asked, "Do we have any other cases flagged, like Elias Jericho's?" Someone else replied, "More than you'd want to admit." Within a week, 6 counties across the state paused their juvenile dockets for internal review. By week 2, 3 judges had stepped down, health reasons. By the end of the month, an emergency memo was sent to every youth detention facility in the state. Reassess all cases flagged for intake without counsel. But that was just the beginning. A high school teacher in Baton Rouge put up a slide that read, "Today we're not studying law. Today we're studying silence." She told her students about Elias, about how systems don't need to scream to be violent, they just need everyone else to look away. A clerk in Tulsa, fired 6 months ago for speaking up, was reinstated with back pay and a handwritten apology. Not from HR, from a judge. A mother in Milwaukee found the courage to reopen her son's case. A father in Georgia called a lawyer he couldn't afford 3 years ago and asked, "Would it matter now?" The lawyer said, "Yes, now it would." And then came the protests. Not the noisy kind. Not the broken glass kind. This one looked different. It was a Tuesday morning. Over 100 public defenders across 5 courthouses walked out in silence, each carrying a file folder marked with the name of a child who had been failed. They laid them down at the steps of the courthouse, then walked away. No speeches, just a message left on the folders. "We remember who they were before you reduced them to paperwork." Journalists tried to get a quote from Elias. They showed up to the apartment, to the school, even to the park he sometimes walked through in the mornings. He said nothing, not because he was afraid, but because the work was never about attention. It was about integrity and watching, and making sure what happened to him didn't happen again to anyone. They caught one photo, just one, a blurry picture from a subway platform. Elias standing next to his father, backpack on, hoodie up, in one hand his journal, in the other a copy of the Juvenile Rights Handbook, now being printed with his case as a precedent. The caption on the photo read, "He didn't ask for justice, but he made it harder for anyone to ignore its absence." The city didn't erupt. It adjusted. Policies were rewritten. Budgets were reallocated. School police presence was reduced. Community advocates were brought into intake centers, and a new rule was passed. No child may be processed, questioned, or held in isolation without the presence of legal counsel and a guardian, with audio and video documentation signed and time-stamped. They named it the Elias Provision. And what did he do? He didn't show up to the bill signing. He didn't do interviews. He was seen weeks later, helping a younger boy in the library learn how to fill out a school enrollment form. That boy didn't speak English, but Elias helped him line by line. He didn't need applause. He was building something else now. Justice doesn't echo through microphones. It reverberates through policies, protections, and people who finally say, "Enough." Share this if you've ever changed something without needing credit. There are 2 kinds of silence: the one you carry to survive, and the one you keep because you no longer need to explain yourself. Elias had lived in both, but this part of the story wasn't about him teaching. It was about who was finally ready to listen. It started with a letter, slid under the door. No name, just the words. "I should have said something. I didn't. I see that now." The handwriting was shaky, but Elias recognized it. It was the school security officer, the one who saw him get pushed down the stairs that day, and said nothing. Not because he hated the boy, but because silence felt safer than conflict. Inside the envelope was a note. I quit the next week. Couldn't look at myself anymore. If you ever want me to say it to your face, I will. Elias didn't respond, but he didn't throw it away either. He folded it, put it in his journal, right next to the page where he wrote, "Sometimes power doesn't corrupt. It just makes cowards louder than the brave." Then came Ms. Raines, his old counselor. She found him outside the library. "Elias," she said, "I owe you more than I can say." She was the one who'd filled out the early incident reports, the one who recommended behavioral review when he didn't engage in group sessions. "I thought I was protecting you," she said, eyes glassy. "I was just protecting my job." Elias looked at her, not cold, not angry. He said just one thing. "I wrote about you." She blinked. "What did you say?" He opened his journal, flipped to a dog-eared page, held it open. "Some people want to help, but only if it doesn't cost them comfort." She read it, closed the book, nodded. Then she said, "I hope I'm not that person anymore." One day, after school, a girl from his old math class caught up to him. "I saw the photo," she said, "the one of you on the train." Elias raised an eyebrow. "I used to think you were stuck up," she said, "like you thought you were better than us." "I never said that." "I know. That's what scared me. You were quiet, and it made us realize how loud and dumb we sounded." She smiled, sheepish. "Anyway, I see it now. Thanks for making them change things. You made it safer for people like me." Elias nodded. Then, for the first time in a long time, he said something that felt like sunlight. "You're welcome." There was one reckoning left. Judge Harmon, disgraced, suspended, stripped of most of his legal credentials, he requested a meeting with Elias through official channels. A formal apology. Elias declined, not to be petty, but because some apologies aren't owed to him, they're owed to every other kid that man never saw as human. So instead, he wrote a note and had it delivered back to the judge's lawyer. "This isn't about me. It's about the children you'll never meet, whose names you never learned, whose families you hurt, whose trust you buried. I don't need your apology, but you need to say it, in public, without asking for forgiveness in return." And finally, a moment no one expected. A 12-year-old boy, different school, same city. He walked up to Elias at a bus stop, held out a folder. "Ms. Bell says I can file a motion to seal my record. I don't know what that means." Elias took the folder, flipped through the pages, looked the boy in the eye. "You do now." He showed him where to sign, how to submit it, what to say if they push back. And when the kid hesitated, Elias said, "They'll act like you're a problem, but you're the proof that something changed." He didn't tell that kid everything, didn't explain what it feels like to be stripped, misfiled, and nearly erased. But in that moment, standing in the sunlight with one hand on a motion to seal, the other in his hoodie pocket, Elias knew something had shifted. He wasn't the boy who had to survive the system anymore. He was the boy people were coming to, so they didn't have to survive it alone. If you've ever carried the weight of silence and then used it to help someone else rise, share this. Some reckonings don't need permission, just presence. It was raining again. Light, steady, the kind that made the city sound like it was breathing slow for once. Elias stood across the street from the courthouse. No hoodie this time, no handcuffs, just a backpack, his journal inside, worn soft at the edges but never damaged. He didn't go there for revenge, didn't go to gloat. He went because it was the last place he'd been before the world tried to erase him. He needed to see it, not to remember the pain, but to remind himself that he was still standing, still choosing who he became next. The guard at the door had changed, younger, nicer. He opened the door for Elias without hesitation. "You here for a case?" Elias looked up, thought for a second, then said, "No, I'm just here to walk through the front door." He passed the intake hallway. The chair he'd once been cuffed to was gone. The paper login system replaced with a digital check-in. A sign on the wall now read, "All minors are entitled to immediate counsel. Ask, speak, you are seen." He walked past it, didn't stop, didn't need to. He made his way to the empty courtroom. Courtroom 4B. Same walls, same echo, but it felt smaller now, less threatening. He stood in the spot where he'd once been processed like a barcode, then walked to the judge's bench. Nobody stopped him. The room was empty. He didn't sit in the chair. He just looked at it, then reached into his bag, took out the journal. He didn't open it, just placed it on the bench. Gently. A single page inside was marked, not for anyone else to read, just for the room to remember it had been there. On his way out, he saw a boy sitting in the waiting area, legs swinging nervously, Mom beside him filling out forms. The boy looked up at Elias, didn't speak, but his eyes said everything. "Are you one of them?" Elias paused, took a breath, then gave the boy a small nod. Not a wave, not a smile, just enough to say, "I've been here, and I'm still me." Outside, the rain had stopped. He walked home with the kind of peace no courtroom could give, the kind that comes when the system didn't break you, and you didn't let it take your name. That night, Elias wrote one final line in his journal. They tried to erase the presence. Instead, it became the proof that won't go away. If you've followed this far, thank you. Some stories aren't meant to go viral. They're meant to stay in people's bones. Share this if it stayed in yours. Justice isn't over. It's ongoing.